Hello, everybody. And I hope that you are safe and well wherever you are joining us from today. Firstly, big thank you to the guys for inviting us along today. My name is Sam Brown. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Hero Gaming, and I'm honored to be hosting a discussion today with a couple of industry legends, successful entrepreneurs, and innovators in their own rights. Nick and Robin, welcome. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Feeling good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. My first time in a studio, I didn't realize I was quite so shiny, but anyway.
You look great, Sam.
Thank you. So let's start off with some nice, quick introductions. So Robin, why don't you kick us off? Give us your 30-second highlight reel.
Oh, I can do it quicker. I'm boring. 39 years old, living in Spain with my partner, a father, and been into iGaming for 15 years, doing everything from private to listed companies, leadership, product strategy, casino mostly.
Wow. Okay.
There you go.
51, living outside London with family, and a big history of online marketing. I used to work in Betfair. I headed up a department in Kindred. I set up a marketing agency that got sold. That was all good. After that exit, I then set up a crypto casino, and that did pretty good. I exited there. I then got into real estate. I still have a side project, as it were, in online gambling to do with gamer gamblers, which is a real frontier area. And and that's about it.
Very good. Well, thank you for those lightning intros. So just a bit of hygiene for those of you who are joining us today. We will be taking comments, so questions and comments. Please pass those through the chat, and they will be passed through to me here in the studio. I cannot guarantee that we will get a chance to answer all of these questions during the session today. However, the ones that we don't, we will obviously endeavour to respond afterwards to you online. So, without further ado, today we're here to discuss innovation, and specifically radical versus incremental innovation, and of course relating to the gaming industry. So to kick this off, how about some definitions? So, Nick, why don't you start us off with what does radical innovation mean to you, and perhaps give us some examples.
Okay. Well, it's disruptive innovation. Not to be disruptive. It's just that sometimes innovations come along which change the world. So the iPhone and actually the innovation. Let's say exchange betting was a massive innovation. So these things, they're a step change forward in how things are done. So the advent of online gambling was an enormous innovation, for example, obviously. And so another way of looking at it is, if you think about Peter Thiel, who's a billionaire entrepreneur, he talks a lot about 0 or 10x. So in other words, is that thing 10x better than before? If so, it has a chance of being disruptive, but in a positive way. And therefore, you could say that is a dramatic or radical innovation. You don't get that many radical innovations in gambling these days, as a general rule, I would say. The only places you get these kind of step change innovations are outside of regulated sectors, where you've got almost like a Darwinian ecosystem. So in other words, people try stuff out, it works, it doesn't work. You get rapid evolution, and then what survives can often evolve into being a clear winner. You had this with exchange betting, interestingly. So Flutter, there were a few exchange betting organizations. in and around the time Betfair was launched, and Betfair became the first winner. They weren't necessarily the first exchange betting organization, for example. So that's my general take on, or my general definition of radical innovation. It changes something so fundamentally and spreads like wildfire because it's so much better than before. And one other big theme that I always think about when I think of innovation is that very often businesses kind of or industries find something that works and they just stick to it, like online gambling. And the world just gradually moves past that point until there's almost like a huge earthquake, and then something comes totally left field and everyone's just sideswiped by it. And then the incumbents just wonder what on earth happened to them. Now, this may or may not happen in gambling. It just all depends on regulation and strength of regulation, I suspect.
Okay. Very good. Robin, what about you? How do you share the same definition? Perhaps some other examples from your experiences?
Yeah, echo that. You mentioned two buzzwords, incremental innovation, and I guess disruptive innovation. I think incremental innovation is just what we all do every day. It is the gradual improvements to the business. I guess disruptive innovation is a bit more complex. I guess the definition is when you have an innovation that is so strong that it's creating a new space, a new value network that will eventually replace the space that was there. And it's true what Nick is saying, that we haven't had much of that disruptive innovation over the last 10, 15 years in iGaming, but there is some. And I actually brought with me a few examples and things that we can rest our eyes on. And I wanted to start with sort of looking at this one. And you have here a 60 million per month NGR gambling business. And I'll talk a little bit while we watch it. And what it is basically is players are coming into a gambling game where they're allowed to buy packs. And there is an RNG behind them that will give them randomized rewards, and some players that you get in FIFA loot packs are better than others, and you can sell these players in marketplaces. So it is essentially you buy in, you have a RNG and a random output, and you have a win. You can sell it, and this here is a $650 million business, the 60 million NGR business, and I think it is a good example of radical innovation. It created a space which caused a lot of other people to follow suit. I wanted to show a couple of other innovations which I have looked at lately. I have various sites in front of me, one called stake.com, and which is in the crypto space. You can create an account here and you will then play with crypto. I won't log in now, but they have a range of cool stuff here, including stake originals. Let's have a look at a few of these games. In fact, let me show at another crypto site, which I think is even a better example. Here you have Gamdom, and you have a chat in the left-hand side. You have a level up system here, and look at this cool game here called Crash. It's a very simple game. Doing millions of euro and GR. It's a low entry game. You simply come in, you place a bet, and it is your job to click yourself out before the arrow crashes. So for the longer you dare to sit here, the more you win. Now you've lost all your money. If you'd clicked yourself out previously, then you would have won money. And you can see here it is social, people are betting, people are lining up, people are chatting, and I think it is a very good example of innovation in gambling. So is it incremental or is it radical innovation? And I would argue that it is the latter. And I'll stop sharing there and start talking a bit around the topic. And I think it is very important when we talk about these two concepts that we look at sort of the locally regulated space versus the international .com space. The locally regulated, I mean those who has a license, for instance, Sweden and UK. And I would argue that the job of those regulators is to control the marketplace and make it more socially responsible and collect taxes and so forth. And the point is that if you come with a radical innovation in these markets, something that has such an explosive value generating growth, that other people has to follow suit or die, then I would argue that the regulators will pay special attention to this. My point is, if you're in the locally regulated space, you need to come with innovations that makes gambling inherently more fun and responsible. If you're in the international space, it's different. You aren't necessarily that regulated, and you can come with innovations that are more value driving in terms of monetary value. And the reason why I showed the examples of Gendom and stake.com and so forth is that they are obviously in the crypto space, crypto being a radical innovation in itself. But for gambling, even more radical, I would say. People can play and get the instant deposits and withdrawals, much like we've seen with pay and play in Sweden, Finland, Holland, and so forth. And it works all across the world, and you can play rather anonymously. So it's a very good example of a disruptive innovation in gambling. And when it comes to the more regulated markets, I think FIFA loot boxes is a fantastic example of radical innovation.
Yeah, loot boxes are fascinating, and they're so pervasive. And for any parent dipping into the world of their children's gaming habits, their kids will come across loot boxes all the time, and it's an absolutely vast market that adults kind of don't really know about unless you're into gaming. And the other thing is, when I've looked at the whole gamer gaming ecosystem, it is huge. There was some crazy stat saying that something like 1 billion people see themselves as gamers. That they've gamed, that they like gaming. No, it's more like, I think from memory, it was, I don't want to run too many numbers because obviously if I'm not 100% sure about it, but there is, at least 1 billion people on the planet, i.e. 15-20% of the population, game regularly, whether it's on a phone or on a computer or whatever. And there's this whole, and humans are wired to get a dopamine hit with a randomized event, because that's what we do. Our ancestors foraged for stuff. If we didn't find anything, well, we keep looking, and that's the nature of gambling. Fundamentally, it's like those randomized hits that we get. And anyway, so the point with the gamer gambling ecosystem is that it's quite subdued at the moment. But if you remember, a few years ago, we had skins gambling, which, for anyone who doesn't know, the way skins gambling worked is that a company called Valve had a marketplace for these things, which were skins, i.e. you could skin a gun. And so you play a game in CSGO or something like that, and you could have a pink gun with red dots on it. Great. And it was just a personalization thing, but then it turned into a marketplace, and then the marketplace then turned into effectively a value exchange. And a cryptocurrency value exchange in effect, and then numerous brands just popped out of nowhere, enabling people to gamble these skins. Like, who heard about that? But yet that market was maybe 10, 15 million users. It's just, and that's the thing about the internet. Those young people don't care about your local gambling regulator. And B, if something catches, it catches wildly. So that FIFA game, that company, the £650 million company, I'd never heard about that. I'd never seen it. And you're saying, what was the NGR on that?
No, so the game in itself, so the company in itself is actually Electronic Arts, and the revenue from loot boxes in FIFA is 650 million. And I just wanted to blatantly call it a gambling operator because that is what it is.
Well, it totally is. Yeah, it totally is.
So my point is, if you look at what they've done, right, and I think this is very important when it comes to regulated markets, then they've contextualized gambling within the world of football. So what we are always talking about in terms of slots, if you're looking at slots or gambling specifically, is that in order to make it more socially responsible, we need to extend the game sessions, we need to make it more slow-paced, we need to put more emphasis on the monetainment aspect, and so forth. And I just wanted to show everyone an example of that done really, really well, because your game sessions are all the matches you play in FIFA, and it is all the chatter you do with your friends. But in there is a little bit of excitement because they added a tad of gambling in there with the loot boxes, right? And they've done the same. You mentioned Counter-Strike Go, where they randomize dropped skins just for your time playing, and then you can go off and sell those or even gamble them at Gamdom or any other sites. And it's another example. But my point is that I think in a regulated market, if we're going to grow the cake, if the industry is going to grow as a whole, then the future is obviously to ensure that there is more fun games, like what you see with loot boxes in FIFA, where there is a slower pace and more entertainment going into the experience. And perhaps the future radical innovation in gambling will be somewhere in between the classical slot game and what you just saw with those loot boxes. Is definitely going that direction in those markets.
Yeah, I did a lot of research into this when I was putting together the model for this this project I was working on, or am working on, with gamer gambling. And there is very little market research in this, but the short of it, in summary, young people are into self-determination, i.e. they like to make a choice, and if they do something in a skilled way, then they create a better outcome for themselves, which is the foundation of gaming. So when you've got something that molds behavior so much or so assertively like gaming does, and then you say, okay, now you're going to have to learn this thing called slots. And talking to a friend of mine who is a slot developer, she was saying that it takes around 100 spins for people to gradually understand how this thing works, these things called slots. And they're just completely luck-based. There's zero skill. And so these young people just don't like that. And the tiny amount of market research that I'd seen had shown that, yeah, the slots were just not popular with young people. And then there was this whole thing about skill-based slots. Again, in Nevada, these were tested, and it was a fail. So if you think about the generations passing almost like a conveyor belt, and you think about an ecosystem building up pressure, the big question is there actually pressure building up? Well, if you look at iGaming, the iGaming news, and if you read the numbers, actually there isn't. iGaming's doing okay. So for as long as iGaming is doing fine, not a problem. But as people get older, as consumers basically fall off the other end of the conveyor belt, as it were, and these younger people come through and the market starts to dwindle, then that's when the pressure builds up. And then that's when the conditions are right for some massive disruptive input, which will just change everything. And it's arguable, again, the iPhone, exchange betting, online gambling, full stop, 15, 20 years ago, whenever it was, electric cars, etc. In my view, I think we're quite a long way from that moment. But I do think there's going to be there is a growing ecosystem of international gambling, i.e. gambling with no true regulation as such, that's just going to build and build and build and build. And governments will then catch up and they'll try and regulate. And I think a lot of international gambling will probably hook on, well, it'll obviously, its success will be based on how easily money can get into the system and get out of the system. So payment providers getting creative and circumventing local rules, that's a thing. And if that can happen, then yeah, international gambling will grow to the point where regulators will just go, this is not good, we're not happy. Governments will start enforcing more controls, a bit like they might do if Bitcoin gets too big. And then we end up with a kind of 1984 Big Brother scenario, which we're already getting into. Sorry to sound like someone from Anonymous.
But
Look, I think, Sam, a lot of people are sitting at home now watching this and seeing a question mark as to sort of, should I pursue incremental gambling? Should I pursue innovation? Should I pursue disruptive innovation? And perhaps that's a topic that we should discuss slightly. And I think if you look at this industry, it's been doing incredibly well simply by mostly pursuing incremental innovation. And everybody knows that good sound business is based on good strategy, good delta management, good current trading. Just stay ahead of the curve, make sure that you innovate, that you pick up on what's going on, and you can still build a fantastic gambling business online by just doing that if you do it really, really well. I would argue, though, that if you see the sort of major value generation that has happened in the industry, then over the last few years, then there isn't too many examples of that beyond sort of mergers and acquisitions and scale advantages and classical sort of economical hacks. Those who has actually innovated and created something and who has achieved that growth, you can count them on one hand, but there is a few. And let's go back to the pay and play example. You had Ninja Casino growing with hundreds of percents and showing the best marketing delta you could imagine simply by removing the innovation came from Trustly, of course, in play and pay, but it was operationalized through Ninja Casino and simply by making it easier, faster to get money out and easier to KYC, and in itself incremental innovation, but some of them became disruptive, right? It led to a vast better player experience. You guys in Hero Gaming saw the same with Speedy Casino, and that's the type of value generation that is interesting, right? And the story to be learned is often that the companies who sits down and creates these sort of innovations, they don't start on a blank sheet and say, how are we going to disrupt the marketplace? They do incremental innovation until the stars align, right? And they suddenly stumble upon a disruptive innovation that creates a new space. And
or they reach a tipping point. So there's actually a term for this, which is aggregation of marginal gains. And you do the basics really well. You keep improving all those little things across the board, and then you reach that tipping point, which is an idea. So aggregation of marginal gains, popularized by the Sky cycling team, who looked at everything that their athletes did and just created tiny marginal gains across the board. And then those marginal gains all add up, and then they win Tour de France 2 or 3 times. Remarkable story. And then the tipping point, which is an idea popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, is this idea that things reach a point. So you get these marginal gains, they build up, and then the tipping point, and then it slides and goes. And that's where, as you say, Robin, that's where those disruptive changes kind of emerge. So and so that's why brands like Stake are super interesting to me, because they do the basics really well.
Absolutely agree, and it's a fantastic book, highly recommended. And so my point is just to the audience, at least the way I see things, is that if you're in those locally regulated spaces, then keep in mind that those aggregations takes time, and you need to decide on a direction you want to go in. And then you'll get better and better at it, and ultimately, hopefully, you'll reach some sort of disruptive innovation. And perhaps what I showed you is an example of the case: really immersive content, really gamified content, really compelling entertainment, and so forth. Perhaps there's other ways to go, like the postcode lottery is a good example of radical innovation in the regulated space, I think, using community, using cause marketing, and so forth. If you're in the international space, I would argue that the way the world is heading, you should look into more of the type of businesses that I just showed, because over time, I think it is moving in that direction. And there's a whole world out there you need to learn compared to sort of the classical business that used to be around Malta and European casino and sports betting. So, it will take time to learn it.
Arguably, Robin, you could say that if you're running a business and you're doing okay, so you're out of the red zone, i.e. you've got enough spare cash to reinvest some money and to just make a decision. So what I would do if it was me, it isn't me anymore. Well, it might be. It depends on this other thing I'm working on. But I would take a 10-year view, And then from that 10-year view, I would think like a investment capitalist, i.e. an investor. So an investor never puts more than a certain amount of their cash into one bet. So you diversify your bets. And you know very well that things like customer service, most brands or many brands just have customer service as a thing. But actually, if you look carefully at I think from memory, video slots was quite good in customer service. Bet365, it's just hygiene. It's boring, but it's hygiene. It's great hygiene. So part of your portfolio of bets could go into, okay, let's improve customer service, et cetera. And then let's improve the site speed, et cetera. And maybe 10% of your betting money, inverted commas, could go into just something really wild that is kind of left field, but it's sort of in the zone. So if it works, you could roll it into the main project you're doing. So we did this with my casino. We played around, we experimented a lot, probably too much in reality. And we built a system based on the idea that there are thousands of slots, make it easier to find slots. The bet was that we would create a search system. So we did that, and it was a fail. And the weird thing was that when we bet on better customer services, just solving problems, better social proof, and all these other really mundane things, actually that was what got things really going. So the trouble is, radical innovation is high risk.
Look, I think we also need to be a little bit audacious. And I remember when the account manager from Trustly came to me 1 year before I even heard about Ninja Casino, when I was the CEO at Gig, and said, we have this fantastic innovation based on PSD2 and what have you. And I looked at it and I was like, no, I'm not going to give away all my registrations to this payment provider. That was my initial thought. And so the point was, I was just pursuing incremental innovation, right? And I had this amazing opportunity of doing something that would really be value accretive to my company. And I was protected instead of being audacious. And therefore, I didn't spot the potential. And I think there is a lot of radical innovation around us. We just need to open up our mind, be audacious, and dare to grab it.
Gentlemen, we are unfortunately running out of time. Some fantastic discussions there. I think really kind of insightful for the audience to understand that, both radical and incremental have their paths, and, depending on the sort of markets and areas in which you operate, and of course your mentalities and your behaviors, both can be successful models, although carrying different levels of risk. I want to thank both of you for some, a really good discussion. Some really kind of thought-provoking ideas there. We didn't get a chance to answer the audience questions while online now, but we will endeavour to do so afterwards. So stay tuned for those responses. Again, a big thank you to everybody at iGaming Next for having us and for hosting a great discussion today. Thank you, of course, gentlemen, once again, and we hope that you all enjoy the rest of today's fantastic agenda. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, guys.